Hey YouTube, here's Heiko. Quick random video. Haven't made a video in a while. My little small engine repair shop had been on hold a little while for my day job. They kept me pretty busy. I don't know if I've ever mentioned what I do for a living. I work as a helicopter pilot for a air ambulance company and have been working a lot of hours, so my shop is a mess. I have so many projects sitting around and just waiting for me to put them back together. This year is one of those projects that I just finished up. I'm not going to show you what I repaired because, I mean, it's the standard stuff, you know, dirty old gasoline in the fuel tank. So clean the fuel tank, and Brixton Stratton 5 horsepower engine with a solid state ignition. Has one of those standard carburetors that have their own little fuel pump internally that suck the fuel out of the fuel tank and pump it into it doesn't have a float. It has a somewhat of a float bowl with a overrun. So the fuel pump just pumps fuel in there, and then there's another pickup that sucks it into the carburetor. So it's actually pretty ingenious. No float valve, no floats, no little moving parts in there. It's pretty much just a diaphragm pump on one side right there, and then a gasket between the carburetor and the tank. So the carburetor is always mounted on top of the fuel tank. They gunk up in the two pickup tubes, the one that takes it out of the fuel tank and puts it into the little fuel chamber, and then the second pickup from the that sucks the fuel into the carburetor. They gunk up a little bit, and then the diaphragm for the pump action, those go bad. Took it all apart, threw it in my ultrasonic cleaner for a little while. I'm still trying to find a good solution, like a mixture of cleaners, chemicals, whatever, that go into my ultrasonic cleaner to, you know, be easy on the cast aluminum bits and pieces that I throw in there, and which does not lead to more corrosion and oxidation and whatnot. But yeah, it turned out okay. So I wash them in there, then I usually blow them off with compressed air. If I still have some clogged passages, I get sometimes some carburetor cleaner out. But that stuff is so aggressive to any kind of rubber seals or O-rings or gaskets or diaphragms. So I try to stay away from it. Yeah, put it all back together, and then believe it or not, it wouldn't run. It would run on choke for 30 seconds, minute maybe, and then probably the pickup tube that sucks the fuel out of the fuel tank and then delivers it to that little float bowl wasn't doing its job, and then I almost gave up because, you know, you jump through all the hoops, you make sure you have spark. I mean, this is a solid state ignition. It doesn't have points and condenser. It actually just has a specific coil that sparks at the right moment. So this is pretty bulletproof. I did clean the tank really nicely, made it sure it's bare metal in there, no rust, no flakiness, no nastiness. Sometimes I get the pressure washer out to get really the gunk out of it. Did the carburetor, did the filter, you know, had it all lined up, and it would start immediately, like first pull. And then just always run out of fuel. And then there's a little float bowl that's at the bottom of the carburetor. You can make it easier on yourself starting it if you fill the fuel tank all the way up, because then the fuel gets into that chamber just by flowing into it, and the diaphragm pump doesn't have to do anything. But yeah, that only works for so long until the fuel level goes down and down and down, and then it, you know, and then he has to rely on that pickup tube. And here in this case, it wouldn't do it. And yeah, so I put it on hold because I didn't want to rip it apart all again. Worked on some other projects, and then I guess just by sitting here with clean fuel in it, and which also has a little bit of some cleaning action going on, fixed itself. So some clean gasoline. If you have maybe some varnish on some surfaces, or maybe a tiny little passage in the carburetor is just not quite right, and the carburetor being filled with fuel just cleaned itself. And now I have a running chipper. So let's put it just on run. And those, they have a lot of rotating mass in there. They, how the chipper works is pretty much a spinning blade and then just an opening with the opposite edge, and you just shove the branches in there and chips it up. Let's see. You always have to put your foot down there so it doesn't tip over. Yeah, the pull start little clutch in here with the little balls seems to have a little bit of an issue. So maybe that's something that oh, here we go. Well, now we have engagement. All right. Well, let's start. First pull. Let's see. Oh, it won't. Maybe we need the choke after all. Let's try it again. That sounds like it's a little rich. Relatively nicely. Those carbs can be a little finicky sometimes with mixture adjustment. If they're all clean, if you have clean jet in there, you can adjust them pretty nicely, as you can tell. When I first started it up, it was a little rich. Turned the mixture adjustment in a little bit and immediately started idling really nice or running really nice. Yeah, solid little machine. It got all cleaned up. Really, its issue was dirt and old fuel. And those Craftsman, no, not Craftsman, Briggs & Stratton engines are really long-lasting, bulletproof. Not the quietest, not the most fuel efficient, probably not EPA compliant these days anymore, but they just work. They just work. And yeah, you just heard the blade scraping along the cutting edge. Even the carb kits for those. I mean, if you buy Briggs & Stratton original carb kit, is probably 30-40 bucks. You can get those for $6-7 made in China from eBay. Not that I like to do that, but if you constantly have to fix the same type of carburetor and you want to have 5-6 of those kits lying around, it is just it's those consumable parts, and they fit pretty well and they work pretty well. So yeah, nothing wrong with that. This is the chute where you feed the little branches, or even down this direction, and then it has another feeder port right there. You can open that up. That's if you go above 1/2 inch in diameter, so the thicker branches. This is not a commercial grade chipper that you can use to really do some production, but for your little clippings, for some end of the season pruning, those machines are great. It's all a little dirty still. I first wanted to get it running properly. Now it's going to get a wash and a nice oil change. And then it goes back to our church, and it's going to be sitting somewhere, probably until I have to fix it again. But, I like those challenges. I just want to show you a few more things that I've been working on. This little puppy here, it's a Cruise and Carry, a 12-pound outboard engine. It's air-cooled rather than modern normal outboard engines these days. It doesn't have a water pump. It doesn't cool the engine with water. It's pretty much just like lawnmowers and chainsaws and trimmers. Has a little fan on the crankshaft up in here and blows air over the cylinder. It's a single cylinder. I think it's a 1.5 horsepower, if I'm not completely mistaken. At idle only, 4,000 RPM. That's idle, okay. Yeah, this is Cruise and Carry model 6600. Was made, I want to say, in the 70s. They were kind of popular, not really. I see that there are a lot of them around on eBay. I got this one for free here, and it was a big project. I wish I would have turned on the camera for you guys. The piston was seized onto the wrist pin. The connection rod was seized onto the crankshaft pin. Everything was gunked up. The piston rings were stuck in their little groove, so they were not sealing anything. You could not turn this engine. It was not turning at all. So I really gently had to pry it all apart, take it all apart. I was able to get the cylinder off. You know, it doesn't have a cylinder head and a cylinder. It's one piece. Take that off, and then slowly with penetrating oil get it all moving. Then finally I was able to get the wrist pin out, take the piston off, and then soak that in some solvent until the at least one of the piston rings came loose. The other one I had to break and scrape out the groove and get a new one. I couldn't find parts for this particular model, but the engines on those here, they are made by a Japanese company that's still in existence, and they make other two-stroke models. And just by going with, how did that work? Oh yeah, I was looking for a gasket for the cylinder to put it back on the case, and just looked for the brand of that motor, and it's Shindaiwa. Shindaiwa is the manufacturer of the two-stroke engine. And I just ordered a couple of those little gaskets. They were like $2-3 from e-replacement parts. And I found one that fit exactly this cylinder. And then I pretty much went back and to that type of engine that the gasket fits on and ordered the piston ring. And it's exactly the perfect size. So I'm assuming they put the same two-stroke engine on other little, you know, machines, water pumps, whatever. So yeah, I was able to get a piston ring and a new gasket for the cylinder. I could have also gotten a new wrist pin and the needle bearing that's on there. Probably also the same for the bearing that's on the bottom of the connection rod, you know, where it connects to the crankshaft, but this thing is not worth much. So what I did, I just used cleaners and penetrating oil and compressed air and over again, cleaned it all up, all the gunk and muck that was in there. The wrist pin was polished a little bit with some miracle cloth and got it all put back together. I used some assembly lube and started it up, and it runs. You know, maybe there are some nicks on the wrist pin and the bearing is gonna break eventually, but you know, this is not a machine that I'm gonna make much money off. Maybe we buy ourselves a little canoe and slap that on the side next year and just play around with it until it breaks. And then, you know, they're not collectibles. There's so many of those around, and they're not really high value. Maybe it's $100 if you have a running model. So I didn't want to spend, you know, $20 on a, or $30 on a piston, and then it comes with a bearing and a wrist pin, and then take the whole crankcase apart, and then new bearings for the crankshaft. I just didn't want to do that. So I cleaned everything off as well as I could, and got the bearings all nice and clean, and they move really smoothly, and washed it out multiple times and blew it out. And the carburetor was a little gunked up and corroded, and the float bowl down in the bottom. Got that all working again, fresh fuel in there. It's dry. You got a new loop down in the gearbox. It only has a forward gear, but it actually has a clutch in there. So you can, you know, some of those smaller engines, they will constantly spin the propeller. So you always have a little bit of some thrust going. On this particular model, you can actually turn that on and off. The plastic cover here, you see the Frankenstein repair that I did with a soldering iron. It was completely cracked in a million pieces. Brought it all back together. It's kind of solid now. Problem with this is it holds the gas tank in place, so I kind of need this. I've been looking on eBay everywhere, Craigslist, to maybe find a replacement part. Maybe one day I will. If not, for now it works, and it starts pretty well too. So let's see if I can, while holding my cell phone, maybe not, that's going to be a disaster with my knee holding the handle here. Let's see where we're at. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Oh, guys, how am I going to do this? All right, start it up, Heiko. See, the prop is spinning a little bit. That's just because of friction. But then if it's idling, and I pulled a little lever here, this little knob, it engages the prop properly. It's actually pretty well made, I gotta say. The throttle is in a good spot. And it has an on-off button right here. Actually all works. It's really not too bad. It's maybe a little noisy. Here's the exhaust pipe going down into the water, so that's supposed to be underwater. That helps with muffling the noise. But yeah, you know, the two-stroke engines are pretty clanky and loud and kind of rattly sounding. But yeah, it starts pretty well. They have inside this handle here, they have a storage compartment for a shear pin that's inside the prop. So if you hit a rock or a branch floating in the water, you don't destroy the prop. It just shears off a little pin. And there's a compartment for a replacement pin in here. I don't have one, unfortunately. No, it's all pretty simple. And this is actually in pretty decent cosmetical shape, other than the cracks in the hood here. And then look over this project pile here. I mean, not all of it. This is a McLean 20-inch 7-blade reel mower. I love it. I mean, if this thing is sharpened properly, which I have done, and it uses a 3-horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine that still had points and condensers. I replaced that with a solid-state ignition coil, so it doesn't have that anymore. Same type of diaphragm pump carburetor that we just saw earlier on that Craftsman. Runs beautifully. It's not noisy or anything really, and it leaves such a nice cut. If you really like your lawn to be, it looks like a scissor cut kind of. It's really nice mower. They you know, maybe McLean, when you compare it to other commercial reel mowers that they use for golf courses and whatnot, it's not the highest quality mower. Some parts are pretty chintzy, but they still make them. They still have all the parts. Nowadays they use Honda engines or bigger engines, but this one just runs, you know. Give it some oil change, give it a few fresh gas in the spring, and you're gonna be happy with this. Back clapping this is also pretty simple to keep the reel relatively sharp. Yeah, then I have this old sucker here. It's end 70s. It's a front tine tiller, also Briggs & Stratton engine on there. This is also a solid state ignition. It's in relatively rough shape. I mean, I use it actually in my backyard, in my front yard. When I have too much weeds growing, I trim down the weeds, and then I go after it with a rotor tiller and just till it all under. Looks nicely, looks like a farm field freshly plowed kind of thing, you know. I have some non-landscaped surface in my front and backyard, and it just makes it so much cleaner. There's some belt set up for forward and reverse. Starts pretty easily, you know, needs a little love here and there, needs some washing off and blowing off of the dust, especially when you're tilling when the ground is relatively dry. Maybe I need some new wheels, they're kind of splitting, but yeah, it runs. The tines are still okay. I love this machine, it's pretty heavy. And then next to it I have a little home light cultivator tiller. Oh yeah, this belt here is supposed to go with this one. This is actually ready to be sold. It's a 2-stroke little cultivator. If you have just some flower beds and you want to till the weeds under and want to clean it up a little bit, this machine is kind of nice. You know, wing wing. Does the same thing as the big brother here. Just doesn't dig as deep. It just cuts off the weeds and plows them under. I like this little thing, but you know, I can't have 10,000 tillers sitting around. Then another mower waiting to be repaired. This is just a standard, you know, push mower. This is a Tecumseh engine, I think. Boland's. I don't even know if they still make mowers, but yeah, it's a Tecumseh engine. And then here's the big gun. This is a 1952 Milwaukee Equipment rear tine tiller. Tines are completely worn off. The new ones are in the box. The engine is a, oh, what's the brand? It is a, oh my goodness, forgot already. Haven't touched it in a while. Engine runs. It doesn't have the original air filter. This here is a breather filter for like a hot rod. Just made that work with some vinyl tubing, adapted it to the carburetor. The muffler is, you know, just one of those generic aftermarket parts that you can get for lawnmowers and whatnot. And then, yeah, it doesn't have a recoil starter in the front. It actually a wraparound cord, and then you have to yank it. It has a little bit of some, this is not a fuel filter, but it's like a little debris settling chamber. Works. The tank looks rough from the outside, but I de-rusted it from the inside with a rust remover, a liquid rust remover. It's really clean. And now I'm just going to have to make sure that I keep fuel in there so it doesn't start doing that again. Once in a while I start it up. It actually uses a magneto ignition. There is a Fairbanks Morse magneto here on the side. There's a little connector that shuts it down. What is the engine brand? It's a Milwaukee Equipment tiller with a, oh my goodness, yeah, you can't read it anymore. The tag here is completely, it's a Wisconsin engine. And the company still exists. They don't make this particular model anymore, of course, after, you know, over 60 years. But you can still get some parts. I actually, here's, this is an air-cooled engine. You see there are some ribs broken off. I actually have a replacement part over there. That still needs to go in there. You know, I did an oil change on it just to make sure it's not swirling around the rust in there. Took the cylinder head off. The gasket didn't break. Reused it, put it back together, and it runs. Carburetor needed some time in the pressure cooker, I was about to say. You know, and then the rest hasn't been touched really. So engine, drive shaft over to a belt. You can change the speeds with changing the belt gearing, so to speak. Then you have a gearbox down there that drives the wheels, and an output over to the rear tine part. And that hasn't been touched, so I need to do oil change and really make sure that everything is adjusted right. It actually has multiple forward speeds and reverse gears. You need to figure that all out, and you see he has some weird wiring hanging around, and you know, I had to put a new throttle control up there, a new cable. That all works already. So engine is good. The rest hasn't been touched. Eventually we're going to get to it. There's another vintage Lawn Prince 18 mower. Engine runs. The reel spins, but it definitely needs some love. So that, you know, same with the Craftsman back there. No, I'm rambling. 10 horsepower, 30-inch riding lawnmower. This thing actually works. Tires are pretty dry rotten, and it had some cracks in the seat, which I filled with Plasti-Dip in black, multiple layers. You know, those seats are really expensive. They're like 70, 80 bucks, and I just didn't want to spend the money for this machine because it's like 25 years old. Maybe I get $150 for it when I sell it. So, you know, what I repair, I have to be cost effective. I want to make sure the engines are good and the drive is good and the mower deck is good, but the cosmetics don't need to be, you know, it's not new. It's, you know, and as you can see, it's pretty dusty, but, you know, it fills the cracks in the seat, and it works. Has a bagger, has everything that it needs. I just need to buy a set of tires, and then next spring it will be sold. Oh yeah, and then here is what's holding me back to work on anything else is a snowblower. You know, winter is around the corner. This is a Noma 29-inch, 10 horsepower snowblower that's completely taken apart. And there's the engine. The previous owner, oh, he butchered it so badly. There's a control lever linkage in here that on those machines seems to break all the time. The welds just break. And what he did, instead of taking it all apart, getting to this linkage here and then re-weld the arms here, the control arms, he tried to get to it without doing anything. He took the angle grinder out in the back of the machine, cut those lines, bent the sheet metal open, and then tried to fix this from the outside. There was a blob of weld on here. So pretty much what happened was this arm here broke off or got loose, and then he had a blob of material here welded on, and with his angle grinder trying to get into it, cut into some of those control arms and stuff. So I had to re-weld stuff. You know, my welds are for sure not the prettiest, but you know, I made them a little bigger. This is just flux wire welding here on pretty grimy material. You know, they were like pieces cut out of it. There were like marks from the angle grinder when he was trying to get in there. And then later I found out why this whole thing all went bad. Here, let me turn on some light for you. Oh, I can't. This whole little brace here, all the welds were broken off. This whole part of the gearbox, let's call it gearbox, was all wobbly and loose. And that's why everything in there, the adjustments went completely out of control. And then, yeah, this snowblower, the engine runs perfectly, the auger is fine, the gearbox in the auger is fine. Just in here was all messed up. And then I had to wait 4 weeks for a couple little plastic bushings and a couple of clips. Now it's almost a basket case because now I have to figure out how to put it all back together. Of course, I took a couple pictures. There's some drawings online. I'll put that back together. I think it's going to be fine. But yeah, so that's what I'm working on, what I'm trying to get going again. Lots of machines sitting around and I just haven't had any time. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoy me rambling. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will post a video when I start putting this back together here. All right, guys, take care.